Good morning, everyone. So yes, I'm going to talk to you about a project we've been working on that investigates the links between the environment and the occurrence of disease. This is a project funded by Centre for Forest Protection. It's a collaboration with Sandra Denman, Elena Vangalova, who are both here, Kath Tubby and Anna Perez. So a little bit of background before I start. I think we all think of disease outbreaks as something driven by a pathogen, which they are, but also the environment can play an important role in a couple of different ways, both influencing the host, so a host needs to be susceptible to disease before it will occur, and also in creating a conducive environment for infection. And so we set out to look for correlations between existing data sets and various environmental variables. When we're doing this type of modelling, we can make predictions, but we always need to keep in mind a few caveats to the work. So the climate will definitely change, and there may be unexpected or unpredicted interactions that occur as climate change. We can show how current trends would appear in future climates, but we can't always account for every interaction that might be there. And we also need to think that disease may still be spreading. So we are applying species distribution model techniques, and these really assume that the species of interest has fully filled its environmental niche. So, talk about two case studies, the first of which, acute oak decline, something I've worked on for a long time, and Sandra gave a good introduction yesterday, so I'll just very quickly move over a couple of key facts. So this has two key symptoms you might spot in the woods: these stem bleeds, dark liquid running out from cracks between the bark plates, and the emergence holes of Agrillus bigotatus. Now, these are quite small, hard to spot, but very distinctively shaped, like a capital D, so they're curved, but with one perfectly flat edge. So as Sandra went through most of this yesterday, I'll move quite quickly through, but this is fairly recently discovered, involving a bacterial pathobiome, lots of species that are new to science, but this native beetle interacting with them. And so lots and lots of research that you will have heard about yesterday involved there. Part of the work that I've been involved with has been looking at the distribution. So again, there was a talk yesterday all about tree alert. Lots of the reports we're dealing with here all arrive through tree alert. But we're aided in this case study because in 2014, we had some designed surveys to go out and monitor oak woodland more generally. So we have a good idea of where occurrences are happening, but also where they're not happening. And so the colour coding on this map shows that time point. Anything in blue is before the 2014 surveys, and anything in yellow is more recent. So perhaps some evidence of spread more recently. Again, this is a good case study for looking at the role of environment, because as a decline disease, there's this key predisposition element. So environment and abiotic factors really come to the fore with this case study. And so lots written in the literature about what might be influencing distributions, but we wanted to try and pull out some of the key correlations that we could find. And so we used the distribution data, lots of various environmental variables, but the key ones that were coming out as important were rainfall, and low rainfall being a key predictor for AOD, so drought impacts, very important. Warmer temperatures, and we used a threshold of about 11.5 degrees, which relates to the beetle development. But also some interesting things with nutrient imbalances, so high nitrogen and low sulfur, and also at lower elevations, which is probably a fine scale temperature and rainfall impact. So we can get really clear trends. We can make prediction maps showing where we think AOD should be occurring. And through some of the more recent arrivals, this seems to be performing fairly well. So I was out walking with family near Abergavenny. We found a Agrillus emergence hole on a beetle, and I was quite shocked. That was quite far away from where I thought it should be. But actually, when we zoom in on the map, it's on a south-facing hillside, a little bit warmer than expected, and the model predicts that this is a conducive area. So we have some correlative evidence and some anecdotal evidence that it's working, but we also wanted to go out and test this. So we set up experiments that Sandra described yesterday, looking at the impacts of drought on AOD development, and we also went out and did lots of field sampling, looking at nutrients around infected trees and in infected woodlands. And so, very reassuringly, the same things that we were finding in the correlative model showed up as being important. So nitrogen, very high in these AOD infected woodlands. So a second case study we were looking at during this project is ash dieback. Arrived in 2013, discovered in 2013, but possibly here, certainly since the early 2000s, maybe since the 1990s. And looking across Europe, there's now evidence it's been in Europe since 1970s. Obviously having a wide-scale impact, spread very widely across the country, but still some role for the environment within its occurrence. So again, working with tree alert data, but here we don't have a design survey to back up these findings, so we have to handle the data in a slightly different way. But just looking at the density of reports, we can see they're more frequent in certain areas of the country, but there's obviously other things that might explain, such as population, why there's less reports in northern Scotland versus southern England close to London. To account for some of this bias, we could look at the overall tree alert reporting levels, so the number of different species that are being reported in each area. And we can find some correlations with population, but also areas such as here, I think it's Wisley, where lots of reporting goes in. And we can see a clear relationship between the occurrence of ash dieback reports and the general level of reporting. So we can build models and include this spatial bias within the model and make a prediction. And we also find some things that we would potentially expect as important. Ash coverage also strongly impacts the disease occurrence, but also summer temperatures. And we find a polynomial relationship, so there's a peak, there's an optimum temperature for occurrence. Annual rainfall, with higher rainfall areas being more predisposed. And also the local topography, so we use the process called geomorphons to split elevation data into valleys and hilltops and slopes. And we're finding ash dieback occurring more frequently in the valleys. So we can make this prediction from the full model, which is not the most useful, but we can then remove the impact of the tree alert reporting bias and start to see a westerly, higher impacts, more westerly, particularly in South Wales where there's lots of ash, and also here in Kent where, again, lots of ash. The final step in this project was to then try and look at what may happen in the future. So we did this using two different scenarios. One at the top, which is a sort of moderate climate change scenario, and then on the lower set of plots, a quite extreme climate change scenario. Business as usual, we don't change anything. And this was all possible because of CEH's Chescapes dataset, which has gridded information about environmental variables. So we could apply our models to their findings. We have 3 time points. So this is current prediction in the near future, so up to 2050, and then further into the future, up to 2080. And generally we see plots of, getting redder further north, so more suitable to ash dieback. We also get this phenomenon where in the southeast, we're predicting less suitability for ash dieback. And that correlates with some of the environmental results from Europe, where in southern France, there's a lower prevalence of disease. That doesn't necessarily mean it's a good place to be growing ash, because hot and dry is not the ideal conditions for that species. So in summary, we can take this available data and make predictions, find out high-risk environments. We can use this for things like targeted surveillance to prepare for future risk. But there's some big caveats. We really need to test these correlations with either experimental or more detailed observational data to confirm that the trends we're finding hold true. So for oak, we've done this. For ash, we have a list of things we could test. On top of that, we also need to monitor for change, because there's chances we're missing interactions within our data sets.